Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good day, goeiedag molwene, and welcome to another episode of Life Matters, where we explore the complexities of modern relationships. That's what we're chatting about today, emotional intelligence as well, and mental well-being, with a focus on men's health. It's sort of a general conversation that we need to have around men's health. In today's fast-paced world, relationships face unique challenges, and particularly modern relationships are rather complex and multifaceted that hopefully we want and we'd like to see requires a blend of faith, emotional intelligence, EQ as we often call it, as well as effective communication and empathy. Now, the rise of independence and self-expression, especially in women, has transformed all relationship dynamics. How exactly do we adapt to this? And hopefully we'll answer that question in today's show. One specifically, which is often suggested, is that couples and all relationships who practice empathy and active listening have better conflict resolution skills. Yes, that's a word you need to learn, conflict resolution. Joining me today is Zaid Ismail to discuss this topic of how societal expectations, modern relationships, and the rise of independent women and emotional intelligence affect men's mental health. Now, Zaid Ismail is no stranger to the media world, a self-published author, coach, and mental health activist with over 25 years of experience in leadership roles. His thought-provoking works, including Own Your Life and An Incomplete Love Story, have resonated with readers globally. Zaid's expertise and passion for mental health advocacy have made him a sought-after voice both on community radio and television. Today, he shares his valuable insights on navigating the challenges of modern relationships, emotional expression, and a word often we use is narcissism. So that's what we'll be discussing today. Also looking at how societal expectations, modern relationships, the rise, as I mentioned, of independent women and emotional intelligence does affect men's mental health. So today, inshallah, let's introduce Zaid Ismail to our studios. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Hilaal TV.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah for having me here.
Khair. So independent women in relationships, it is something that is very common in today's day and age. It has evolved somewhat differently as well. So today, let's look at the first question off the cuff, embracing equality and the traditional roles. Previously, we've seen men, at least society and culture, dictating that men should act in A, B, and C. Now, society and culture, and this is like not too long ago, maybe 5 years ago. Now, plus that 10 years ago, culture and society says vastly different. What impact has culture played over the years, over evolution? I think I did a show recently on sinusitis, and evolution has even changed the structure of our nose and our mouths, for that matter. So I think, Zaid, let's start off with that question. The expectation of embracing equality and the traditional roles of men and women, and how society and culture has played a role in that.
I think the first thing we need to realize is that one of the reasons why we see this is because we're trying to solve the wrong problem about the balance of roles in a relationship or in a marriage. And I could argue that it's more culture that is kind of lagged behind the developments of life, rather than our role as Muslims in our homes. And it's because of our struggle to try and reconcile the cultural norms with the demands of contemporary life and our need to be Muslim, and to establish our role in that regard, and then focusing on rights and responsibilities within that context and all that. That's what's complicated everything for us. It's complicated things for us because we're actually not mindful about what are we using as our point of reference to determine how best to strike this balance.
So when you say, because mindfulness comes up a lot now, even when parenting, and parenting, being mindful what you're saying, being present in that communication. What do they say? Gentle parenting nowadays. Things have evolved and changed vastly. how can men adapt to this changing expectations? You're saying that let's use a core, something that's foundational in our life, in what we know, to then navigate us. Does that then play a role in these changing expectations and, reconciling this traditional masculine, I think, idea of the norms and the position of men?
I think that in itself is a problematic point of departure.
Okay.
Because the moment we're trying to fit into a narrative, the moment we're trying to subscribe to a certain model, we're trying to be enough. And if we struggle to be enough, that brings out all sorts of insecurities and vulnerabilities and defensiveness that then contaminates the entire situation. What we should be considering is who do we want to be in that role with our partner and vice versa. And then within that context, strike a balance. Because if we had to take the approach that a lot of people are trying to take these days, then respectfully, the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija anha would not have had a successful relationship, because they didn't take that approach at all, which is something that always baffles me, is that we keep referring to these magnificent examples, but we never ever understand how it is that we can implement that in our own life, because we're so fixated on rights and responsibilities, roles and expectations, societal norms and independent partners and autonomy and all of those things. But what do we want to be independent from? There's one thing I keep telling people, and came up again recently in another discussion, is that there's two things that if it is a dominant trait or a dominant focus for you, that if you have this, please don't get married. And that is, if you want to be independent and if you're looking for instant gratification. Those two things are completely conflicting with the goals of marriage.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're speaking to both men and women here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, when you are deciding, to get married, there is the societal norms, there's the influences, but at the end of the day, we know where we come from. So we have in our family very strong women.
Yes.
And we have very strong men. And we use that sort of as a base, like, I'm not going to get married to my father, or I'm not going to get married to someone like my mother.
And then you end up getting married to exactly that. Right.
So let's talk about that relationship with women and how men can navigate those relationships with independent, financially independent, strong women who are voiced. I was listening to a couple once. I think they're married for just over 20 years. And she harps on the fact that her husband always said, no, they got together and he knew she had a mouth on her, like, you say, but he always wanted to change that.
Right.
And she says, like, for 20 years, it didn't change. And you married me like this. So I'm just going to use that example. When you get married, you're married to a strong, independent woman that has a mouth on her, that's not going to be quiet. She's going to say something. How do men navigate, these confident women and still maintaining an identity in their family, in their unit, and adhering to Islamic values and roles?
I think that's quite a difficult one for men, because men get into a relationship, like, let's assume whatever the nature and shape of the courtship is, halal or haram or somewhere in between, beside the point. But in that period running up to the marriage, they encounter these characteristics in their potential partner. And for the most part, they look at it and they think, this is invigorating. This is like, it's rejuvenating. It's something refreshing to have someone who I can actually have a conversation with, right? Rather than someone that's just submissive and doing. And some people looking for someone submissive, good for them. But when it comes to someone to finding a partner that's got a presence and a voice of their own, and you find that intriguing in the courtship, you need to understand what you're getting yourself into after marriage. Because after marriage, the one thing that trips all couples up is that they don't realize the impact of the change in expectations that come after marriage. And that's what people struggle with the most, is the change in expectation that then provokes their insecurities and their vulnerabilities. And if they don't know how to deal with it comfortably, or if there isn't enough trust and understanding between the partners to be able to navigate that together, then this mouthpiece becomes a problem. Like, you always trying to put me down, you always think you know better, and you always want it your way. And that's because of the defensiveness that comes in about, I don't feel adequate anymore, and because I don't feel adequate anymore, I'm going to try and bring you down to where I am, rather than trusting that I can rise up to where you are.
So let's talk about that balance, the balance of her saying, I feel this, and him saying, this is how I feel, because the focus is men's health. And often, men are not able to express their feelings in the relationship. So, and probably be more assertive, and it comes out the incorrect way. So how should and must men express their needs and feelings in the relationship in a safe and expressive way that they can be heard, possibly balance, that leadership role and maintain that imamat in the family, but also not, like you say, push down her feelings?
I think that's a very important understanding that needs to be established, is that men, I would argue, are equally expressive emotionally, but they just express themselves differently. And because there's such a major narrative about men must express emotion and they must be allowed to cry and all of these things, and that it's not weakness, and trying to teach men to express themselves differently, that we don't realize that what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to get men to express themselves the way it would innately and naturally come to women. We're not accepting men's expression of their emotions the way they are comfortable expressing it, or the way it comes to them naturally. But because it doesn't look the same as what a woman would do it, we assume it's unhealthy. We assume that men are restrained, that they're not expressive and all of that. But it's a matter of understanding the person you're with, because this applies both ways, right? Because sometimes you get women who would express themselves, and I'm not saying they're masculine, but they would express themselves the way a man would express himself, and you get men who would be more verbal and who would be more expressive the way a woman would typically be. So there's no one size fits all for this. But what we need to understand is that if a man is taking strain on something, he's not going to break down and cry and look for sympathy, because that's not in his nature, right? It's not wrong for him to do that, but his natural inclination is going to go quiet.
Yeah.
He's going to become withdrawn. He's going to be reserved, not because he's giving people silent treatment, but because he's trying to figure something out.
And often that silent treatment is taking in the wrong light.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we assume that's emotional abuse.
Very good, but thank you so much, Zaid, for sharing your valuable insights on modern relationships. Now let's explore the complexities within these modern relationships and how societal norms have changed all of that, finding balance in those relationships today. Join us in our next segment as we explore the possible complex issue of narcissism. Narcissism, label in men. When we often say, oh, you're gaslighting me, oh, this is a narcissistic tendency. Zaid expounds on this just after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum. A very good day to you. This is Life Matters, and we're dealing with men's health and how societal norms has created this expectations of how men should be and how they can be and how they shouldn't be. And often men are not able to express their feelings and frustrations aptly because of what they know and what they've been taught. But today we have a wealth of information out there. Yes, the World Wide Web is filled with probably, I think, over redundant, but some information that is there for us. And coming back to our basics of what our religion teaches us is also something that we have to hold dear and close to when it comes to controlling anger. How do we express how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with conflict? But in studio we have Zaid to unpack this topic. Narcissism, label in men specifically, is what we want to talk about in this segment. It's a very sensitive topic, and I think the correct information. Not too long ago, a bit ago in the parenting show, I had a psychiatrist who spoke exactly what is narcissistic behavior, and so we need to educate ourselves about what is something before we accuse someone of something. Now, Zaid Ismail offers guidance on navigating these challenging situations. He's a veteran blogger who has been sharing his thoughts on the human condition for more than 2 decades. In 2018, Zaid left his corporate career to fully dedicate himself to his passions of writing and coaching. He regularly creates content focused on mental health and is an active mental health advocate on social media as well. So catch him on his pages. Now, Zaid, something that I think men often feel pressure is to prioritize their partner's emotional needs. And you've mentioned that just before the break. it comes out incorrectly. So would you say that men do feel the pressure to rather look at everybody else's feelings? And I know it could be the same for women, but I think more so because men don't know how to express and they haven't learned to. So they latch on to, okay, let me take care of, my mom's needs or the kids' needs or my wife's needs first before I deal with what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm. I think men generally expect not to be understood in that way. Mm-hmm. That's the general experience that I get and feedback that I get from men who come to me for assistance as well, is that there's a certain resignation to, okay, well, it doesn't matter how I feel about this. Mm-hmm. Help me to figure out how it is that I can just solve this problem with my partner. And then all the emphasis is on making sure that your partner is understood and your partner is heard and your partner is seen and your partner has a safe space to express herself and all of that. But it doesn't strike that balance in understanding. And the one thing that always strikes me as extremely concerning is that a lot of people come to me after many years of marriage and they're still extremely dependent on verbal communication to understand what's going on. Mm. They don't ever consider the non-verbal communication that happens. And that's where most of the information is actually
that is
stored.
such an important point, because I think that's where emotional intelligence comes in.
That's where empathy comes in.
Yeah. And I've heard some scientific readings on men are not born with that ability, emotional intelligence. So the connections, I mean, maybe you can elaborate on that. The mm-hmm. connections that the boy child, that infant has with his mother when she's breastfeeding, when she's changing him, when she's interacting with him, in the sense that, like, we cuddle babies, we talk to babies, right, even though they don't understand. But lack of that and not enough or the appropriate kind actually doesn't help that boy child develop the emotional intelligence that he needs and also what's in. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm always very, very cautious when it comes to scientific research into human behavior, because scientific research is generally focused on the biology of human beings rather than the nature of human beings.
Okay.
And it's not a matter of whether we were born with it or not, or whether men have it innately or not. It's that we're by design, and this is something that, strangely enough, even mainstream psychology agrees with, is that by design, the very nature and innate interest of men and women is different. Mm-hmm. Women are more concerned about the people experience of things, okay, and men are more interested in the things, in the problem solving, analytical stuff, pragmatic stuff. So we weren't designed to be the same in the first place. So trying to make us the same is actually oppressing our natural inclination. And the way a man would express that kind of closeness and bond with their children is supposed to be different from a woman. Because the one thing that I always remind women about is that they can't expect a man to have the same level of emotional connection in that way, because they'll never understand or even experience what it's like to have a life growing within you. So by design, we are prevented from understanding that depth of connection. So there's a hadith that I'm always reminded of, where it talks to the fact that the best gift a father can give the child is a healthy self-esteem or a good education and a good upbringing. It doesn't say the parents, it doesn't say the mother, it says the father, because that's what men are for.
Like structural things.
Yes, yeah. Teach them how life works. And the mothers teach them how people work. Okay. Now we're saying men must join in that. And then what you eventually end up with is you end up with the man and the woman in the relationship coming at loggerheads in confrontation about what's the best way to teach that same thing.
Yeah.
There's a balance that needs to be struck. And if we're going to keep trying to make them the same and equal, we're destroying that balance.
What about the very old school thinking that we're not able to come out of? But that's what I know. That's what how my father, it comes up whether or not you say it or not. That's how my father dealt with it. We didn't still dilly-dally with regards. Let's just say, example, there's an argument about the kids. You disagree about some sort of discipline, and that often comes up. And it's beautiful, when two people come together from two different backgrounds, and now, inshallah, you guys make it work, but not argue about it. So let's talk about that, making it work. And the one is just stuck with his ideals or her ideals.
Right.
And they're at loggerheads. We still come into the narcissism
yes.
Label, because often how they treat each other, that comes in.
Yes.
Yeah, you're gaslighting me.
Exactly.
That's narcissistic behavior, you know.
And then everyone suddenly wants to diagnose everyone else.
Yeah. So let's talk about your stuck ways and.
I think the stuck ways is something that comes from a position of fear. Because no one wants to be inadequate, no one wants to be insignificant or incompetent in doing something as important as raising children, right? And that's why the importance of it, the gravity of it, is what is more likely to provoke our insecurities than anything else. Now, if isn't a healthy understanding between the couple, then there's going to be a power struggle in that regard.
Yeah.
And that's usually what goes wrong, is that they lose sight of what's the value they're trying to impart to the child in that moment of discipline or teaching, and they focus on the method. And then if the method of the father is considered to be too harsh or too firm, or the method of the mother is considered to be too soft and too gentle because it's not building them up, then they end up squabbling about that and lose sight of the fact that the value is not being focused on. So what they need to understand is, from the mother's perspective, if she has the more gentle, nurturing nature, then this is how I would want him to experience this learning. And from the father's side, this is why these elements are important to bring his attention to, so that he learns from it or she learns from it, right? And that's a healthy conversation about how to raise children. Not, my father did this way, so you must respect me for doing that way and don't ask me to do it differently and all of that. Because I think it's Ali Radhiyallahu who said that your children were intended for a different time from your own, so don't expect them to behave the way you behaved. So, and especially in the times we're living in now, the one thing that we lose sight of is that the reason it's so difficult to make this work right now is because I believe we're in a transitional kind of generational space. We're going from a space where there was a village that was finite, that was close, and that was around us, that we could relate to. And if we directed our children a certain way, generally the village directed them the same way. We don't have that village anymore. And our children have access to insights and information about different ways of doing things and different lifestyles, and that if we can't have a meaningful discussion with them about it, all it seems like is repression. We're asking them to suppress everything that they know about themselves or that they are curious about, because they must just obey or else. And that's where the struggle comes in, is that we don't realize the context within which we're raising children, and we don't equip ourselves to be able to understand that context, and then our insecurities get the better of us, and then we end up starting to fight about all the wrong things, and we lose sight of what's important.
Inshallah, we're able to grasp that guidance that you are trying to say, because when you say little words like we don't equip ourselves, and touching on those, grasping that and realizing that we need to make the effort. Allah gave us these children, this relationship as an amana. So we probably need to take a break again, but why is the narcissism label so misused, so misled, so misunderstood in the context of male behavior, of specifically male behavior? And I still wanted to add, societal additions and social media information out there has influenced, our perception on narcissism and men.
I think this is a fair time to say there's a trigger warning coming up. I honestly believe that the person who self-diagnoses someone else as a narcissist is probably more narcissistic than the person that they are diagnosing. Because to find it within yourself, to label the entirety of a being based on your experience with them, that is arrogant, right? But we don't mean to be arrogant.
Yeah.
And that's where the problem comes in, is that we don't realize the difference between our intention versus our method.
Yeah.
You're not going to solve a problem by labeling someone. You're not going to solve a problem by labeling behavior either. What you are going to solve a problem by is understanding why they behave that way, why they appear that way, why you're experiencing that side of them. Because if you want to claim someone is a narcissist, if you want to claim your husband or your partner or your father or your brother or whoever it is, any male figure is a narcissist, then you need to also consider, well, are they that way with everyone? If they're not that way with everyone, here's the really difficult part that people don't want to consider, is that if that man is kind and considerate and available and generous with a whole lot of other people, but not his own family or not his partner, then my question to you is, why is it that his partner brings out the narcissist in him?
That's going to be my next question, actually.
Right? Because that's what we need to be more honest about, is what is it about the dynamic that you're sharing with your partner that brings out that defensiveness in them, that insecurity or that selfishness? that we then look at and we say he's a narcissist. No one is 100% anything. No one is 100% narcissistic, suffering from anxiety, suffering from depression. There's always variations in it. And if we understand what are the settings and what are the relationships that bring out those insecurities in them that cause them to behave that way or feel that way, then we have a better chance of seeing the human behind the behavior rather than labeling the human as defective.
And often they say when you're pointing one finger at someone, the rest is pointing back at you. So a woman's independence, can that possibly trigger their assertiveness, possibly trigger insecurities or narcissistic tendencies in men? I did a show on a diagnosis of narcissistic behavior and the actual condition. So please watch that on Parenting Today. It should be available, and all our shows available on our YouTube channel, Hilaal TV. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we talk more on this topic and hopefully answer that question back in a moment. Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum. Very interesting topic we're talking about, and it is in line with men's health. How do men actively express their emotions, their vulnerabilities? And the topic of narcissism did come in. Did you know that narcissism is a mask that often hides insecurity, shame, and vulnerability? The narcissist's greatest fear is often being forgotten. These are just some commentary from notable authors and experts on narcissism who shared some insights on this condition. Let's deal with men's emotional expression and vulnerability, or their inability to express that. So Zay, just coming back to that question, the triggers. Can women, children, or even, another man possibly trigger narcissistic tendencies in one? And looking at, reading about narcissistic behavior, it's actually a disorder which can only be diagnosed after the child is 18 years old, according to the psychiatrist that I interviewed. And she was saying a 2-year-old, a teenager, actively commonly display narcissistic behavior, but it can only clinically be diagnosed when the child has developed their personality, when they're an adult. So, education, of course, is important, and that tendencies that we look up, this is a gaslighting situation, and that comes up. This is the new words that people are using. You gaslighting me. You're not listening to me. It was something I just heard today on the radio. So it comes up more and more, and like you said, labeling people is often, look at yourself first. But is it possible that tendencies, whether it be male and female, does come up because of how somebody is approaching them or speaking to them?
I think every single one of us has narcissistic tendencies.
Okay.
Every one of us is guilty of narcissistic kind of behavior from time to time. But it doesn't define the entirety of who we are. The more important thing is, when we label someone as being a narcissist because of their insecurities, we dehumanize them even further.
Okay.
Because the whole reason why we feel insecure in the first place is because we're afraid that as a human, we're not going to be enough to people who are important to us. Now you're taking that human that's already struggling and you're writing them off. So at which point do we start recognizing that all of these labels that we've come up with distracts us from the human we are with? Because that's one of the biggest problems in relationships. We become so fixated on the role players in the relationship that we don't see the human behind the role anymore. We don't see that behind the husband there's a man who has his own struggles, who has his own difficulties, who goes through his own amount of shame and indignity that he has to suffer through in the workplace and all of those things, just so that he can fulfill his role as a provider. We don't see that. We only see the man who gets home after a long day and doesn't have the energy or the inclination to want to help with chores around the house, for example, and we think, well, you're not supportive. But by the same token, we can then argue that the wife is not supportive by helping him get through his day at work while he's at work. That's why this expectation to have people show up in a specific way dehumanizes the person you're with. And it breeds a sense of entitlement that because everyone says I should be able to expect this from my husband, that means that if I'm not getting it, he's wrong, not me. There's no understanding.
Let's explore that expression of dehumanizing, because like you say, we don't know what's happening with the next person. So there's the saying, don't ever, approach someone the way you think what's on the picture, because you don't know what's happening deeper down.
Yes.
So can you elaborate on dehumanizing someone? What does that do for them? What are you doing to them? And what emotions and what are they left with? How are they feeling?
I think at the core of it, and this is a core need that I discuss a lot in my books as well, is that the one thing that we all need as an absolute minimum is to feel significant to the people that are significant to us. If that need comes under threat, it brings out bad behavior because of our insecurities, because the threat of being insignificant and the consequences of that is so great that we can't possibly allow ourselves to become insignificant. And that's where the bitterness and the anger and the rage and the emotional outbursts and all of those things come from. Now, if I see someone behaving badly and I only challenge the behavior, I only challenge the behavior, I don't go beyond that, then I'm not concerned about the human that's struggling behind the bad behavior. I'm only concerned about compliance.
Yeah.
And that's dehumanizing. It's like, I don't care what your stresses are. I don't care how you get treated at work. I don't care what difficulties you go through to make sure we've got food on the table or a roof over our heads, because that's your job. That's your duty. And that's what the mainstream narrative has come down to. It's framed men as, especially in the Muslim community, it's your job to be a provider and a protector, so just do it. It's not my obligation to do anything more than the bare minimum at home, because there's no rights that Allah has given you over me in that regard. So that means that whatever I do, you must appreciate it. But whatever you do, I'm entitled to it. And that's how you dehumanize men to the point where they will then resort to the only thing they can resort to, which is authority, power, resource.
So at the end of the day, we are Muslims.
Yes.
And we go according to what the Prophet ﷺ has taught us. So let's link that to narcissistic behavior or dehumanizing someone, for instance. How can, what is Islam, what does the Prophet ﷺ teach us, to your knowledge, about self-love, humility, arrogance, possibly even, these tendencies that does come up, and how men can actually show emotional intelligence of expressing, instead of coming home being miserable and the woman getting the wrong message, or the men sending out the wrong messages, and the mixed messages, like you said, are not the invisible messages are not being seen, as you said at the beginning, because that was a very, very, very important point that you raised. After being married for so many years, or being in so many relationships at work with your parents or with your kids or your siblings, how do we not take on the non-verbal reactions of people? So as Islam as our base, what does it say about self-love, arrogance, being humble, emotional intelligence, to encompass us, to come down to that core and reacting in that way?
There's a hadith that comes to mind, which is rarely used in this context, but I believe it has a lot of relevance, is that a believer is one who wants for his brother what he wants for himself. And if we don't look at that from a material kind of risk perspective, and we look at it from a perspective of, if I was struggling with something, how would I want someone to approach me, to correct me in it, or to support me in it? And then that is what I need to bring to bear on someone else I see struggling, especially if it's my partner. So if I see my partner having a bad day, or going through something that's really bringing out a side of her that I know is not usually hers, then I need to consider, why is this good person that I'm married to behaving badly, as opposed to just assuming, oh, well, she's just full of nonsense again. And that's the question that I think must be at the core of everything that we try to center ourselves on when we're trying to come to grips with this, is when you see someone behaving badly, do you believe that they are inherently a bad person behaving good sometimes? Or are they inherently a good person who is having a bad run? And then you approach it from that perspective. Because the one thing that I always also try to keep myself grounded with is the level of empathy and compassion and understanding that we offer to our partners, or even our families and our children. Is it at the very least, the amount of empathy and compassion and understanding that the Prophet ﷺ offered the man who urinated in his masjid in front of him? Now, if we can't offer that bare minimum to the people around us, then we need to introspect. We don't need to blame them for not deserving it. We need to introspect about who we want to be, rather than who we think they deserve us to be.
Does men know what they want when it comes to emotions? Do they know how to express it? And if they don't, what is the path to follow?
I think, like I said at the beginning, men don't express emotions in the same way that women do, but they have the same emotions.
Okay.
But so if a man wants to feel appreciated, he doesn't care about flowers and about token gestures and about words, sentiment. For example, if a man puts in the effort to, say, create a space in the backyard for his family to have a gathering so that they can have some good family moments, bonding moments available to them. And every weekend, after a long week's work, he comes home and he says, let's do a picnic in the backyard. And the consistent response he gets is, no, we're always at home, let's go out. That feels like ingratitude. It feels like what's important to me and what I want to share with my family doesn't matter to you. The only thing you people want is the easy life. Going out, paying for stuff, doing things that are supposedly trendy and whatever it is. But these things that I'm doing to create comfort for us, to improve our quality of life, is taken for granted. It's like you're supposed to.
Yeah. The recognition of that is ignored. So,
But the recognition, sorry to interrupt you, the recognition is the critical part, is that we mustn't assume that talking about it is recognition. Because for men, remember, they're very analytical and very pragmatic in the way they approach things, right? By nature, for the most part. So when you talk to them about something, it doesn't land unless they experience it in your behavior, in your action as well. If there isn't a consistency between the action and the verbal communication, then the verbal communication is just token.
Okay. So we must, as women who are the more emotionally intelligent ones, need to understand the mixed messages from our husbands and our children. Thank you, Zaid, for emphasizing the importance of men's mental health and wellness. Remember, taking care of yourself is essential for building those strong relationships. Taking care of yourself first, whether it is getting on a musla and connecting to Allah, whether it is talking to your partner and expressing what you need to say, and the understanding of nonverbal interaction must also be there. So explain that to the next person. Men, are significant in our lives, and they teach the next generation something that they need to know. So let us teach the next generation into emotional intelligence, into understanding, into compassion. Modern men, the modernity of life have changed men's masculinity very much. And coming down to Islamic values is something that we need to focus on. But we'll talk more on this topic just after the short break. Don't forget to interact in our social media pages and let us know what you want to watch as well. We'll be back in a moment. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back as we discuss a pivotal topic in our society, in our homes, literally on our doorsteps, and that's men's health. How do they express their emotions? What is their mental well-being or like? Is it something that you've spoken to your spouse about, your dad, for instance? The men in our lives, alhamdulillah, as women, there is an array of information, education, workshops that is there for us. I know the Parent Centre in Cape Town has a very good fatherhood program as well. So latch on to that, tell the man in your life, your significant other, egg him on if there's more information or just a subtle non-verbal reaction that you want from him or your partner or your child or your son, for that matter. How do societal expectation versus, modern relationship, the rise of independent women and emotional intelligence affect men's mental health is what we're talking about. Our guest, Zaid Ismail, is a self-published author, as I mentioned earlier, and he's very much a mental health activist dedicated in putting that information across when it comes to the average male, the average Muslim male in South Africa. He's also writing a book in the works, and we very much would like to see that very soon, and catch his social media pages as well for that. So emotional expression and vulnerability, modern masculinity in today's day and age needs to look this way, and this is how it looked previously. But we also have to tie it into Islamic values. So how do you help men? How do you help couples navigate this understanding of empathy, the emotional intelligence? How do you think men can navigate the changing power dynamics when the women are a little bit more expressive and stronger, and sometimes even the leader in the household. Is that dynamics even correct? Independent women can still be a functional female in the family by playing her roles and then them complementing each other. So men are just, in some instances, house husbands even. Mm-hmm. How do they navigate that challenge of expressing how they feel when there is a very strong woman in the family, and understanding societal expectations also? Does that influence their reaction? Because often we think, oh no, let me not do what I think I need to do. And should we even let societal expectations influence us?
I think the moment we focused on societal expectations, that's where we create problems, because we then start looking for compliance or conformance in our home with those expectations. And that's how we lose sight of who are we with, what is it that we share, what is it that we're supposed to be collaborating on, rather than owning as different domains of control or power in the home. And that's the problem, is that it's the emotional expression has to be relative to what is the quality of the relationship between the two. Now, if you know that you are okay with your partner, that you have an understanding and that she respects you, and she comes across loud about something because she feels strongly about that. If you're going to take offense to that because she's not expressing herself the way you would want her to express herself, then you're shutting her down. And then that's just going to lead to more problems, because now she's going to feel unheard and misunderstood, or as if she doesn't have a voice. And then because she has access to means and resources and independence, she's going to exercise that because she doesn't want to become insignificant. So we all want significance. And for men, they need to become more aware of the impact that they have. Men, I think their blind spot, the most common blind spot of men, is that they lose sight of the impact that their presence has. And they're more focused on whether or not they are acknowledged, whether they are respected. But if you realize the impact of your presence, you will then realize how it is that the way you carry yourself has a direct impact on how it is that others respond to you. And if you come across brutish and demanding and insensitive, you're going to provoke a response that is going to be in line with that. But if you don't realize you're doing that because that's just your natural way and you must just accept me for who I am, then understand that your natural way is going to result in a natural response. So from both sides, I think the biggest thing is that we need to start understanding what impact we have on our partner. And when we understand what impact we have on them, and we interpret their behavior based on that impact that we have, and we factor that into how we understand them, we'll then see that, yes, they might be out of line about something because you disagree with them about something, but the way they're expressing themselves is because they have reason to believe that unless they do it that way, they're not going to get through to you.
What is your advice then, like practical advice to Muslim brothers? I mean, there's a guy sitting on your couch and he's in your rooms and he needs to know how to express his emotions, his vulnerabilities, particularly for men, and this idea that they now have of what masculinity is about. And decoding all of that and coming back to maybe advice that you have given them. I mean, Muslim men, they do embody positive, I'm sure they would like to embody positive masculine traits that will help society grow and will, then counter off onto their boys, for instance. But they just sometimes don't know how. And, having talks like this often, brings that conversation on, because I think we just don't have it enough.
I think Muslim men who try to be masculine, who put in an effort to be masculine, they need to recognize that they've already got a problem with themselves.
Okay.
The moment you're posturing to be received a certain way, it means you're insecure. You're not comfortable with who you are. You're trying to fit a certain narrative so that you can get the respect and the admiration and everything else that goes along with what is supposed to come along with that. And that's where this whole kind of enter-take mentality comes from. And we need to be careful about that, because a lot of Muslim men, they subscribe to that kind of mentality, that misogynistic approach to how it is that we must establish our place and keep women in their place and all of that sort of thing. Again, go back to the first marriage in Islam. You will not find any of that demonstrated there. In fact, you won't even find any hadith that talks about how the Prophet ﷺ went and discussed the rights and responsibilities with his wives. There was always an understanding. They established an understanding based on what was uniquely true about the balance that they brought together. And if you don't have it within you to do that, understand that you have to work on yourself. You have to understand why that's uncomfortable for you, why it is that something feels so daunting and so threatening that the only thing it gets from you is a very, very rigid response. Because that's what we do, is that when we feel out of control, we resort to power, authority, rules, compliance.
So what are the things that Muslim men can do to prioritize their spiritual growth and their development in understanding with the non-verbal reaction that's happening around them?
They need to get out of their heads. They literally need to get out of their heads.
Is it attached to some trauma?
It's attached to a fear of not being good enough. Because there's such a deeply ingrained, almost harsh conditioning of this sense of the man is the provider protector. That we reduce men to being the provider protector. But what's worse is that men start subscribing to that mindset of, I'm just a provider protector. So they don't expect themselves to offer more than that, and they don't see any reason why they should develop themselves more than that. So then, as long as I'm being the provider protector, that means that I now automatically fulfill your rights. So that means you must respect me as a leader. And then they want to have final say on everything. But they want to have final say without truly, genuinely considering mashura from their wife, the counsel from their wife. And the Prophet ﷺ took counsel from his wives all the time. He took it from Aisha radiallahu anha, he took it from Khadija radiallahu anha, and those are just examples I can think of, and I'm sure there's more of it. So if we want to claim our rights and responsibilities within the context of the Sunnah and Sharia and all of that, we need to be sure that we are establishing the character of the Prophet ﷺ in the way we go about claiming that, or establishing ourselves with credibility in those roles.
That was actually where I was going to lead my last comments, and I think that's perfectly said. Nothing more needs to be added. If we want to go back to understanding what our roles and responsibilities, let's go back and use the Prophet ﷺ's first marriage as an example. Exactly. MashaAllah, what a beautiful one. Zaid, Ishmael, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we can chat again about your book when you're back at this side of the world, and it will be all done and dusted, but all the best to you for your continuous journey that you are creating when it comes to mental health and the advocacy around that, because I think there's not enough said to both men and women and the community, society in a whole. So Jazakallah for your time. Till we speak again, Assalamu alaikum to you.
Barakallah. Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you so much to Zaid, our guest in studio today, for sharing his expertise and inspiring us to prioritize men's mental health. All the best to him for his continuous effort for creating awareness within the mental health space. And of course, Sterkte on completing his book. And we'll watch out for that. To you, thank you for joining us, to our audience. It's really been an explorative conversation, the complex world of modern relationships and the independence of women, as well as not forgetting emotional intelligence and mental health for men. Remember, we see you, we hear you, and we support you. There are support structures out there. To all men that are struggling in silence, know that you're not alone. Take the plunge. Your mental health matters, and seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Remember, healing is possible and support is available. Reach out, speak out, and prioritize your well-being. And for all men around you, if you're a woman, let's make them worthy and make them understand that care and acceptance is what they are, what they need. Otherwise, do reach out. It is a brave act, so please don't think that it's not. Reach out to supportive loved ones, professionals, or helplines. Please don't suffer in silence. Break the stigma and seek that support. Thank you so much for joining us, and remember, every small step towards self-care is a victory. Don't forget to subscribe to all our shows for more enlightening conversations. Join us next time for another empowering show. Until then, stay informed and stay holistically healthy, mind, body and soul, from the rest of the Life Matters team here in Johannesburg. Wassalamu alaikum and goodbye.